New information has come out detailing the troubled period of Overwatch 2's development that led to the huge cancellation for the RPG component of the game, aka the entire reason for the 2, remember? The clearer the picture becomes, the worse it looks, as we learn more about Bobby Koticks' meddling and the influence that the Overwatch League had to sabotage everything, including its own success. Bobby Kotick treated the Overwatch League as his pet project that he tried to not only force into existence, but into prominence, demanding an entirely unreasonable scope and scale of expectations. Today we'll be combining recent leaks on an important podcast, as well as reports of this over time, as we've been tracking this story for years now. We know that it was the demands of the team owners that forced the hands of the developers to rush the game towards early release. But with more information, I think it's more severe than we even thought it was originally. And it looks like it's about to be all for naught anyway, because the Overwatch League looks to be ending. Bobby's big ploy blew up in his face. We've got a packed video for you today, but first, a quick message from today's video sponsor. Today's video sponsor is a favorite of mine, Manscaped. I was a fan for years before they ever sponsored the channel, which is why I'm excited to tell you guys about the Performance Package 4.0 bundle. The star of the show is the Lawnmower 4.0, which is cordless, waterproof, with a built-in light in it so you can use it in the shower. With the advanced skin-safe technology, you can use this on any part of your body without fear of injury. I would never trust any other razor for this all-important task. Also in the bundle, we've got the anti-chafing high-performance boxer briefs. Manscaped's performance boxer briefs are second to none, top in class when it comes to fashion and function. They've got 6 styles to choose from. You'll fall in love with a pair that will be good for either business or pleasure. You've got the option to either purchase single units or packs of 3, which you're probably going to want to do because you want to keep these in your rotation. They'll be your favorite boxers for sure. My favorite part is the texture of these. The quality of the material just feels great, but Manscaped's always setting the meta with their products. The jewel pouch design is going to be supportive and comfortable for your family jewels. And the fly opening is just better and more convenient than any other boxer I've ever worn. You've got to pick up a Performance 4.0 bundle today. Head on over to manscaped.com and use our promo code OVERWATCH at checkout to get 20% off your entire order and free international shipping. They call them your family jewels for a reason. You better take care of them. After all, they are your family jewels. Give them the best. First, let's give a bit of context. It was stated in the quarterly earnings report for Activison Blizzard that they would offer Overwatch League teams $6 million to leave the league after this season if they opt into that. It has been hard for me to find anyone who seems to think that the teams would reject this offer and commit to a league that has drastically underperformed the impossible expectations set for it. Recently, the Overwatch League laid off about 50 employees, so the end seems inevitable. Bobby Kotick gambled the house on this league, wanting to rub elbows with his billionaire buddies without the proper scaling and management to sustain it. And worse yet for gamers, that ambition destroyed a huge chunk of the potential of Overwatch 2. In a recent Four Horsemen podcast, 4 industry insiders air all the dirty laundry from the inception years of the Overwatch League and chronicling its downfall and a litany of shockingly bad decisions. MonteCristo was a caster, but more importantly, a consultant on the league whose expert advice got ignored or overruled as Bobby Boy was wheeling and dealing over the top of everything. Harsha was a successful coach in the league in the early years, and now, after a career change, is happy to burn bridges with Blizzard and the industry, and we thank him dearly for that. He's got some banger quotes from behind the scenes. And the last 2 members of the podcast, Thorin and Richard Lewis, are journalists, and especially RL will be important later. But first, I'm chomping at the bit to share with you some key findings. Let me lay out some of the big ones, and we'll dig deep into the context of each. But let's start. Harsha claims that in 2018, he was told to his face that 90% of the dev team was already working on Overwatch 2. 2018! Yes, you heard that right, which is why they had such trouble to update the game or even balance it well around that time period. That might be a bit shocking of a detail to hear, and maybe confusing considering the final hero Echo was added 2 years later in 2020. But try to remember how far in advance this content gets made. Echo herself was a crucial component to the Overwatch story from the beginning. I think they probably always anticipated to release Echo near the end of Overwatch 1, as she's kind of the bridge point of the narrative design of the entire premise of the game's universe. Kind of the jump for when this AI technology starts to be dangerous. Like Echo's like a super weapon, but also sentient and a good guy, but also locked in Route 66 in a payload and, all the other story components. Like, I think it was important narrative narratively for the developers, is my point. And while perhaps we might look to Brigitte as perhaps evidence that they were reactionary with their hero releases to try to shake up the meta intentionally, there's far more evidence that the hero releases are kind of just haphazard and not like planned in order to solve a problem in the game. It's just the heroes they had available to release at that given time for the most part. Point being, most of that work had already been done at that point. With 3 heroes a year, that means they already had around the last 6 to 9 or whatever of heroes stockpiled, ready to go as they transferred their energies to the next game. None of this should come as a surprise because it was exactly the Blizzard business model up to that point. Diablo 3 was very similar, where it got a big launch hype, a dwindling down, then an expansion. That's the same trajectory that Overwatch 1 was on as a boxed product. The only annoying part about this is all the while they also claimed that it was a live service game every step of the way. And it really wasn't. They just said that so you kept buying loot boxes, hopefully. And then we didn't, and well, now the changes have been made. The key takeaway here is that the maintenance mode for Overwatch occurred a lot earlier than we realize. It seems more obvious looking back, but at the time, they gave us no indication that this was the case. Just the results looked like it was the case. And as years mounted, that pressure also mounted. Now, we'll return to talking about the Overwatch League in this, but there's some crucial context I want us to keep in mind before we do. Aaron Keller made a blog post back in May of this year, which I feel has been more significant than anyone gives it credit for. It finally adds a crucial bit of honesty, which makes everything far more painful in retrospect. In the blog post, Aaron explains how Overwatch was forged from Project Titan, the failed MMO project that got scrapped to make Overwatch after 6 years down the drain. Then he outlines the strategy that they were on and the trajectory they had hoped for. This is what he said. Overwatch was the crawl, a dedicated version of PvE was the walk, and an MMO was the run. It was built into the DNA of the team early on, and some of us consider that final game a true realization of the original vision of Project Titan. There's so much here to break down, okay? And I love looking back at some of these quotes with more context. When he says, some of us thought, is he talking about Jeff or those in Jeff Kaplan's camp? We'll return to that idea. But more importantly is realizing that their end goal was to work on an MMO again. You know, the thing that they had just failed at doing for 6 years? This is crucial information because on stage at BlizzCon, when Jeff revealed Overwatch 2 in 2019, he explained the endlessly replayable RPG part of Overwatch 2 and compared it to Diablo Adventure Mode, which is basically to say that there will be a grindable endgame. Now, Aaron admits that not just that extra game, Team 4's vision was even at a bigger scale than that. They wanted to make it an even bigger game. They wanted it to go from Overwatch, shooter game, to Overwatch 2, Diablo game, to Overwatch 3, the next World of Warcraft MMO. Now, I gotta admit, that would have been awesome to have, but these interests are directly in contrast to the vision Bobby Boy was building on his own. The contrast is absurd, because while Team 4 is dreaming up not just one, but 2 RPG games, each larger in scope than the last, Bobby Koticks thinks he's gonna make this franchise into the National Football League of video games, while the devs basically ignore competitive balancing and crucial problems like, is the game even good to play and watch at a high level? Does our audience even want this? And in hindsight, guys, I gotta say, Jeff was right about a lot of things. And if this was ever a disagreement directly between the two men, I think we know which one won out. But regardless, I think we can agree that in hindsight, these two paths could not coexist, especially as we know they expected one dev team to make not just 2 games at once, but 2 different games at once. It was bound to crash eventually, and it did. The breaking point was revealed by Richard Lewis in August of 2021 in a report for Dexerto. Lewis revealed that the multi-million-dollar team owners were very unhappy with the league and demanded that the content plan for Overwatch switch to the live service game. They could do that at the time because, oh yeah, do you remember that massive lawsuit that we seem to always forget about, investigating the gross misconduct inside the company, stating that Blizzard was run like a, quote, frat house, which the evidence is so much worse than that term. I think that's not even close to a strong enough term for the rampant abuse that was going on. But nevertheless, at the time, that massive story caused all the sponsors to pull out of the Overwatch League, something that hasn't really returned to this day many years later. That gave the Overwatch owners more leverage to demand Blizzard does things to their liking. So there was a pencils down call that got made. This is a quote from an insider at Blizzard, a developer, I believe, in response to this growing narrative. We're more than aware we need to get it out, as in Overwatch 2, they said. So the word is the dev team has been told to lock in the features the game has, get it fixed, and and get it shipped. We're looking to get it out before the summer of 2022. And that quote was to coincide with the expected start date of Overwatch League. Now, of course, they eventually got it out in October, which is the only thing that was like somewhat inaccurate about this report so far. The date did get changed. But otherwise, all of this has either been substantiated in time or not refuted from anywhere I've seen. Now, this wasn't exactly the moment that PvE died. However, tracking this plotline, I think, undoubtedly weighs into the narrative perhaps more than we used to think. Because remember, these events are all happening at once, and it's easy for us, the public, to view details as they're made available to us, but that's not how it really occurs behind the scenes. We found out about that in August. About 4 months before that, Jeff Kaplan had officially left the company in April. Now, to me, I think it's blatantly obvious that it's around this time that the decision to gut half the game came through. But there's many reasons Jeff may have wanted to leave. Jeff would have known about the lawsuit because they had to give up documentations to the state of California in order for them to investigate to begin with. Being a high-ranking employee, I really doubt that the conduct itself, but for sure the investigation, was unbeknownst to him. Then there's the conflict with Bobby Koticks, who's pressuring Overwatch to be the type of franchise he wanted, which is in direct contrast to the dreams Jeff Kaplan had. It's because I feel this crawl, walk, run approach was Jeff's philosophy to Overwatch, or at least this version of it. Blizzard uses that mantra for all their games, but remember that their big hit is World of Warcraft, and Team 4 was a significant part of the original World of Warcraft team. So they don't just go through the motions with this stuff. No, they literally dream of like bigger scale games on top of each other. And I feel, having a bit of significant time to speak to the man behind the scenes, I feel like I know his character a bit and where his values lie. In light of how severe multiple of these conflicts were internally, I think we can read new things from Jeff's final words as he left the company in April. He said, "I'm leaving Blizzard Entertainment after 19 amazing years. It was truly the honor of a lifetime to have the opportunity to create worlds and heroes for such a passionate audience. I want to express my deep appreciation to everyone at Blizzard who supported our games, our game teams, and our players. But I want to say a special thanks to the wonderful game developers that shared in the journey of creation with me. Never accept the world as it appears to be. Always dare to see what it could be. I hope you do the same. GG, Jeffrey Kaplan." That last part seems to be defending the grand scope he wanted for Overwatch to eventually reach. The RPG game, then the MMO game. But the rest of it, now after hearing more about Bobby Koticks' meddling, which we'll get into detail in a bit, I think is a direct diss at Bobby's decision to attempt these large business deals at the sacrifice for the game Jeff was trying to make. The Overwatch League is just one example of that, but probably the biggest one. Jeff wanted to service the players and make a game. Bobby was playing the Game of Thrones. And when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or your game gets canceled. There's an additional detail that I don't want to let the Overwatch community forget, and I feel they always gloss over this point. We're looking at this truncated time window in 2021. Just before Jeff left, 2 months before, in February, was BlizzConline, which showed us a lot of really cool stuff for Overwatch 2, RPG elements included. At that point, we thought the vision of the game was not changing. And just from a PR perspective, there's no way they would have gone through the trouble to make an appearance to give a progress report for Overwatch 2 in February if they knew they were going to completely change plans in mere months, with the director fully stepping down in April. Because the alternative is to assume that they just flat out lied in February. And for just the legal ramifications alone, there's no way that they can do that, right? That seems ridiculous. I think instead the timeline goes like this. BlizzCon online in February, then the lawsuit is coming. Jeff had information about this, and then maybe other disputes with the company, Bobby, etc. Could be a million things. Jeff left, the lawsuit information comes out, all hell breaks loose. Pressure begins probably right at that point from the Overwatch League for the devs to do something to save the league before it's too late. And because Bobby never really liked what Overwatch was to begin with, he would have preferred it to be like Call of Duty in many ways. There's rumors that when he first saw the game, he asked when he can play it on mobile. Then boom, they cut half the game out. Either that being the decision that caused Jeff to leave, or with Jeff left, there was no one fighting for the different different vision of the game anymore. Either or. That's how it played out. Pencils down, ship what you can now. And sadly, most of the things that we got in Overwatch 2, content-wise, were things we saw years ago, including the push game mode. The biggest upgrade to Overwatch 2 was the cash shop and battle pass. We're not really gonna feel the full force of them changing their focus until years down the line. Now, the podcast had a lot of tidbits of information that I'm pulling from in order to draw some of these conclusions, but I think my conclusion here will be stronger once we go through some of the examples, detailing just how much of a pipe dream it was to begin with, but also the ridiculous nature that Bobby Koticks makes decisions. Let's run through some, shall we? The Overwatch League homestand events would lose around $1 million just to operate because the production requirements were too high regardless of the ticket sales. It's not the size of the venue that mattered, it's how much production they needed in order to run a tournament, the price being far too low for how much time the event would run. For context, this is also why the tickets for BlizzCon are so insane, and at the same time, sometimes we're in threat of not having one. Not because Blizzard maybe doesn't want to have the PR for it, but it's just an incredibly expensive type of thing to run. That's obviously on like a much huger scope, but just a comparison that I think a lot of Blizzard fans might understand. But BlizzCon, Blizzard knows they can sell tickets to that because they have so many IPs people are interested in and so much to do. Whereas these smaller events were a lot harder to convert on, especially with the strategy they went down. MonteCristo describes that the tone and view and just strategy of the league as a whole was supposed to be a lot different. He said that it originally was supposed to be a bit more like inside the NBA, with more playful banter, I assume, which is definitely the energy MonteCristo was bringing to the scene at the time. He says that he got pushback from the developers from that, and I will translate that to mean that the devs want the game to be a bright, optimistic future. So kind of the try-hard, sweaty, trash-talking esports player vibe doesn't really work for them. And what's more, it might not even work for the audience either. Overwatch players are a far cry from Counter-Strike players, for example. Then on top of that, ATVI management sold the broadcasting rights to Disney XD, meaning they had to be even more kid-friendly. The biggest change to me that I'm shocked they didn't go with is that Monty says the format was supposed to be like a traveling road show, similar to the WWE. Now, I'm not necessarily a wrestling fan, but that format seems to make sense, where you bring everybody to a unique place, sell out tickets in that venue, and then you remove all sorts of complications and expectations, and it seems to be a more viable, down-to-earth strategy. More similar to like how we run esports events now, where you'll get a location, play a tournament there, and Bob's your uncle. But because it was someone's crazy idea to make a constantly global league, the scope being so big, they actually had to delay. They wanted to release in 2017, had to wait a year, and stayed 2 years hosting out of LA, tapping out the local market's interest, and in the twilight years, barely selling out the front row. So that's some harsh, cold water reality, which should have been more obvious, but the reason why it wasn't to the higher up managers is because the whole concept of a global league was built on the Morgan Stanley report. Morgan Stanley is an American multinational investment bank and financial services company headquartered in Midtown Manhattan. It's not like those Wall Street boys ever play fast and loose with the facts now, do they? Well, anyone who read the Morgan Stanley report with an ounce of esports experience knew it was completely trumped up. Here's some of the insane claims that were mentioned on the podcast: that 40% of players would watch the finals of the Overwatch League, whereas normal expected esports conversion across the entire scene is around 1%. And that was their baseline estimate. They had bearish claims that were even more than some of these. They expected that 50% of fans would buy merch. Merch sales were famously not good for Overwatch League. And they expected to be able to fill a stadium of 18,000 fans for a 3-day event at $25 a ticket, which essentially is like NBA numbers. All of it clearly absurd based on what we already know under every version that the league operated in. Some might blame the pandemic, but the strategy was doomed to fail before and after the pandemic, regardless of the shutdown. In fact, the shutdown might have helped the league stop these ridiculous expectations, not to mention everyone performing in the league, the players, the coaches, the staff, everybody having to fly across the world constantly. No sport does this. It's a plan that was so stupid, only a child or a multi-billion-dollar CEO could think of. But Bobby Koticks wanted his own NFL. Here's an example of a ridiculous business decision that he made. Remember how DJ Khaled was the musical guest at the first Overwatch League Grand Finals? Well, Bobby Koticks found out that there wasn't going to be a musical act at the Grand Final. So 2 weeks before it, thought DJ Khaled would be a good idea because he was big on Snapchat. It cost them a massive fee to fly him out in the middle of a tour he was on with Beyonce and Jay-Z, and the crowd was not into it. It was clearly a rush job. There was no light show or performance of any kind because there wasn't any time to plan it. Just DJ Khaled saying another one over and over again. Not only did this make Overwatch a laughing stock in the esports community, it was a huge waste of money, which I think is a good way to just view how Bobby Kotick makes these types of decisions. Sometimes these business owners, they really just think being more ruthless and unreasonable makes everyone below you scramble to make something happen so you look good. And maybe in some cases they're able to pull out miracles to make that happen, but most of the time it seems like Bobby's decisions were just bad. Now, for a moment, let's look to the future. The Microsoft deal seems to be going through now, and it's expected that they will shrink esports down to manageable levels, and it's likely the future of Overwatch esports reemerges like in a circuit style, which is regional based. This will certainly be a nice change of pace after years of Bobby Kotick playing it like it's just a game of Monopoly and he can walk away at the end, ruining lives and franchises seemingly on a whim. It surely will be a lot nicer to have an adult in the room instead. Now, my overall conclusion of bringing all this information here for you today is for us to realize the looming threat that Overwatch League was constantly in these devs' minds. The tension between these two organizations was palpable, I think, from any point of view, from viewers as well, but especially as a creator. And I have to think that if Overwatch League just simply didn't exist, all of the development strategy for Overwatch 1 to 2 could have been different. We already know from leaks from previous producers that Bobby Kotick would demand the dev team work on something randomly and abruptly, then change his mind later. And the more examples of this management style we get, the more they kind of enforce one another. And seeing as the Overwatch League was his pet project, it stands to reason to me that he was trying to force its success, when really the better thing to do would have been just to step away a bit. But no, he wants to own it all. He wants to be the king of the new global franchise, rather than let the esport grow on its own at a sustainable pace that the devs don't have to micromanage. Now that we're in the twilight of Overwatch League, I think the game can properly heal from the damage that's been done. You see, because other esport games aren't enmeshed with the developers and the publisher in the same way that Overwatch has been hamstrung by the entire time. I say this because as the devs create a problem that they can't fix, let's say GOATS meta or whatever bad balancing decision or new hero or whatever, any given tournament organizer can make a decision that for the competitive integrity of their product, that they say, let's say, ban Brig, something that the devs would never do, or Activision would never do. Other devs would, and have, when things are broken or make the game into some degenerate mess that nobody wants to see at a competitive level. Those decisions can be made, because ultimately, what are we talking about? We're just talking about a few hundred top-level players in a custom game. They can make whatever rules they want, but expecting the devs to try to fix the game for both areas of play always was a doomed-to-fail strategy that I am very happy that we're further away from and hopefully can put to bed entirely. There was another podcast that creeped up that I have to watch yet, where a panel of pros are discussing whether it's finally time for hero bans, hosted by Yiska on GG Recon. Little did I know that way back in 2018, when I was begging for hero bans, just how impossible that type of decision was going to be, just by the nature of this intertangled, interweaved conflict constantly in the company. The vision for the league was for everyone to be involved, but no esport works that way. It's a dedicated subset of the community that's even interested at all, watching, playing, anything. So them having a bit of a separate experience from the rest of us is normal to competitive games. It would be like saying, well, items have to be removed from Super Smash Brothers because the pros don't use them. Meanwhile, most casual players would say items are the best part, right? It's just like a ridiculous idea. Let them do their own thing away from us so that those decisions and problems they have are separate from the mainstream player base. And it was the commitment to this horrible, fanciful dream that we had to lose what effectively is these two other Overwatch games. It wanted to be two different things at once. A mainstream casual game and the NFL of video games. That was not going to happen. And I admit, I love the competitive side of the game, but I wish I had known the grander scale vision and how doomed to fail all of this was at the start. If we could have gone back in time and never had the Overwatch League exist, a content drought doesn't sound too unreasonable for Overwatch 1. It's just that they promised it was a live service when it wasn't. The more info we get, the more I'm leaning that Jeff was right all along. And the cool things that he wanted to make would have been better, but maybe not feasible. That's the nature of dreaming big, isn't it? And as every Overwatch 2 story ends, a bittersweet goodbye with a mild optimism towards the future. Because the truth is, Overwatch League ending, I think, helps both the competitive side and the casual side of the game. We certainly will be here to track the story as it continues to evolve to make sure that you don't miss our upcoming videos. Hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. Support the channel by checking out today's video sponsor, Manscaped, and use our code OVERWATCH at checkout to get 20% off your entire order and free international shipping. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.